Well, I agree that I would just add that Putin, he even had known before he signed those agreements or whatever the promises he made, he had known before that he would have broken them.
He would break.
Yeah, because he's I mean, he has a mentality of the KGB operative.
Yes.
KGB officer. It's the same mentality, and he's using the same set of repressive tools he has been using in Russia since 1999, since those terrorist attacks and explosions of the apartment buildings in Moscow organized by FSB, KGB basically, and so on and so forth. And of course the ultimate goal is to silence the voice of the Crimean Tatar people in the Crimea.
Well, what does he think? I mean, look at our history. It's always re-annexed, reoccupied, re-annexed, and Soviets, Russian Stalin thought that he got rid of us for good. But we're back again, 300,000. It doesn't seem to be working. What is he thinking?
I think he has a mentality of the past, and probably he didn't learn history.
There was one subject
when he was at school. I mean, he was not good at his history lessons. And
what is he good at then, I wonder?
And spying probably, I don't know, and conspiracy theories, etc. But he would prefer to use force. I mean, he will be focused on silencing people, trying to arrest the most prominent representatives of the Crimean Tatar community,
yes.
Just to close all the media sources. I mean, the Crimean Tatar television TV channel, which was, I think,
obviously, this personality profile, this character profile of Putin, we are re-examining over and over again, Walter. Yeah. And so, if we know him through and through, what can we do?
Well, actually, our son brought up a very important question. It's the question of just facing him with the truth. And I'm going to go back, because I was very harsh on the judgment, almost the historical judgment on the sort of Russian mindset, imperial mindset, vis-a-vis the Sirhan, then with the deportations of the Crimean Tatars and the sort of genocidal policy that happened in the 20s and 30s in Ukraine.
Yes.
But one of the three victims, there are three victims in all this. The third victim, and it's been a historical victim, it has not had a chance, even whether it's the Decembrists or whether it is Kerensky's cadets and so on, 1905 revolution and so on and so forth. The third victim perpetually of the Kremlin's sort of nasty mindset is obviously Russian democracy. And in some ways, I almost now believe that the West made a terrible mistake. We keep talking about how Putin was intimidating Georgia and how he intimidated Armenia in this way, and then Ukraine in that way, and Moldova in this way, and it's done this terrible things to the Crimean Tatars. But one of the losses, and this Vyacheslav, I'm going to say this to you, is that when the State Department and all these crazies and that we have in D.C. and in Europe especially, the ones that love to do business with Putin, didn't they see 3-4 years ago that everyone who had a Western attitude in Brzezinski brought that out 3 years ago at a conference we had. Didn't they see that they were shutting down democracy in Russia? Didn't they see what was happening in Petersburg and Moscow? Didn't they see that people like Vyacheslav, I said to myself, the Crimeans, Tatars and the Ukrainians at least have their own little places on the margins of the empire to hide. Vyacheslav and his friends have to be there right in the middle. They have to be there in Petersburg and Moscow. And how's that going to all work out? And so the world has to confront the fact that this is an existential crisis for the entire democratic order. That everything that democracy has ever stood for, this is the moment. That this is a kind of Thermopylae moment. The hordes are coming through, and we've got to stop them. If we don't stop them now, we may not be able to stop them 20 years from now. So that facing the fact, and it's not mean by military means, but all of us standing you know, if all the kids in the schoolyard face the one bully and say, you're not going to get away with this, something that Putin got in Brisbane in Australia in March, I think, or in last November, where he was faced with the fact that he was in isolation. At that point, if you can keep doing this all the time, but we're not doing that. The West is not doing that. The West is looking for an excuse. And this is why the Crimean Tatars are going to be in trouble, the Ukrainians are going to be in trouble, and Russian democracy is going to be in trouble. I'm sorry.
I think you, Andrei, do you want to make a point?
Since we're talking about the improvisation of Russia and what you're asking, what we need to do, a big push that's happening outside of Ukraine is to gain influence in Western countries, specifically the United States, to help Ukraine build its army. And it's not to, as people ask, well, is it to defeat the great Russian army, which is not that great. But it is the fact that if you look at what happened in Crimea, and we're talking about improvisation, there were 3 dates for a referendum. We need to remind people that it started as an announcement of May for the first date for the referendum, then it came to the end of April, then it became the end of March. And the one major factor there was the fact that Ukraine started to develop a command and control structure over its army that it did not have when Crimea was invaded. And so it's not engagement with your enemy that's most important. It is getting both sides to a parity where they both understand how much each side can suffer. And this is what we've been making great inroads with the United States government, to keep explaining that we need to build up the Ukrainian army, because if you look at the parable of Croatia, if you look at the parable of Yugoslavia, you'll know that although there were the Dayton Accords happened after the West came in and started arming the side to give parity. And this is what needs to happen in Ukraine. There's not going to be a table. Minsk 1, Minsk 2, Minsk 3, Minsk and Normandy will keep going on until we have some parity on the ground where there are significant losses that are going to be suffered by the Russians in a way that will significantly deter them from taking different areas. We're not going to come to a Dayton Accord.
Right.
Walter?
Yeah, and I want to follow up on this because I think the new concept of war has to be brought into this, and that is the notion of unrestricted warfare. And Arsene, it's interesting, man, how that sort of blends into some of the things you can do, and you can do by peaceful methods. But they are, since the Russians weaponized information, we could also, in some ways, weaponize information as well. And this is what the question I wanted to ask you about this, Arsene. One of the things that the Russians are doing very effectively, they did it in Crimea, and they're doing it now in Donbass, is that they invite the BBC and they invite CNN International to go along with them. I'm always stunned by how, you know, Nick Walsh Payton is always there with the Russians, but he never seems to be there with, you know, embedded with the Ukrainian forces. In the same way with the Crimean question, have you guys had any success in being able to have the reporters, have you attempted to get these BBC reporters and CNN International, especially that crowd, and the Euronews folks, to be there all the time? Perhaps actually we should start with Turkish news, and we should start with Bulgarian news and Romanian news. But if he's playing a hybrid war, because he's also using information as a tool, and he's constantly having so that there are 2 sides to every story, even though there's only really one, which is an invasion. Why have we made a dent in international media enough to be able to, in our own way, weaponize information and say, turn it against them, turn the truth against them, and say, this is what's actually happening with human rights in Crimea. There are people disappearing. There are properties being taken away from Crimean Tatars. There are that massive human rights violations, and the world should know about it. But can't the Crimean Tatars now take on that responsibility? While the Ukrainians are doing it in Donbass, the Crimean Tatars, who are the indigenous population, the Ukrainians are willing to always admit that. Someday, man, if both Turkey and Ukraine were to be in Europe and stuff, we could even have devolution of Crimea at some point and see a Crimean Tatar state. But the big question is, can the Crimean Tatars now take on that responsibility and go to BBC and go to CNN International and say, look at what is happening to the indigenous population. This indigenous population may not exist in a year or two if this keeps going on.
Ali, how can Turkey maneuver in pushing Russia onto the Crimean Tatar issue? Habib Altaf, can you chime in? How can, what kind of maneuvering can Turkey have?
Go ahead, ladies first.
Yes.
This important issue.
That's an important issue.
Right, yes.
Okay, I'll try my best. And naturally, Turkey is very sensitive on this issue, in a way that that Russia is the neighbor, and then Russia, yes, it is not that strong, but if he wants, he can play games with Turkey, and you know, then it becomes strong. It all depends what type of diplomatic strategic game they play, because our Middle East East part is problematic, and then and we have this Kurdish problem that we are trying to be solved within our democratic system.
Yes.
And plus with Russia, and that Turkey is little, I think, even though by heart, you know, would like to extend, but due to this neighboring issue, is just because I'm just watching it through news and just being very careful about this issue.
Is it principle versus energy?
Oh, you know, sometimes, you know what they say in Turkey? They say sometimes green of dollar become more stronger than the green of environment. You know, green dollar, you know,
yes.
so, but
yes.
how are you going to manage your strategy is a big issue. But Crimea is, yes, the part of
what has
Turkey.
happened is that Turkey has expressed its kinship with Crimean Tatars. So having expressed that at high levels and within the elite of Turkey, isn't the Crimean Tatars do expect some maneuvering on the part of Turkey?
Of course. Let me also, I want to add, Dr. Walter, about the international media. When we are talking about Crimea and the media, recently there was actually at the local TV station, the Russian forces just walked in, and there were some like attack to the local TV media stuff. So I mean, when we are talking about BBC and CNN, even locally, there
yes.
are big issues for the media right now, that how they are gonna generate awareness internally. So I think Ukrainian, Turkish, all, you know, American fellows, we need to generate more awareness in the US first. You know, talking
yes.
to all media channels and members of Congress and Senate. And Turkish media is doing their best, you know, trying to go about, as I said, there are some more strict to enter the Crimea. Regarding how Turkey's position is, it's very important. I mean, culturally, historically, Crimean Tatars are very important for Turkey. And when we are talking about the connection between Crimean Tatars and Turkey, let me give you numbers about Ukrainian-Turkish trade. It was $8 billion before the crisis happened. And it, of course, it's dropped down. And with Crimea and Turkey was $200 million. So there's a big loss between Turkey and Ukraine. So, of course, Turkey is not only culturally or historically concerning or focusing on the human rights, there's a big loss of trade between two nations. And for other countries also as well. So we need to highlight these other factors that, you know, impacting to the region. As you said, Turkey has other priorities with dealing with the Middle East, and yes. Turkey is unfortunately in a bad neighborhood unfortunately, but always the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Turkish government is watching and monitoring what's happening, and also our ambassador, he was the UN ambassador in the United States, Apakan right now.
Apakan is a very
yeah,
good
he's the chairman of the
OSCE.
OSCE, and we always keep in touch with him, getting the feedback. Yes. So the coalition with the allies are important to deal with Russia.
Yes.
Let me just add to that the fact that there are the media wing of the Ukrainian Congress has been in contact with a lot of people regarding Crimea. On the plus side, there is much more interest in covering the anniversary of the invasion of Crimea than we had with getting the anniversary of the Ukrainian Revolution covered, both in Europe and other independent filmmakers. We've been in contact with it. There are projects that are in the pipeline. However, on the flip side, we have been also pitching stories about Crimea for the entire year to get it into the Western media landscape, whether it is the repression of LGBT rights, whether it's the removal of medicines from Crimea and the plight of the people there, the human rights tragedy over there, numerous stories that would easily be accessible by the American media, and yet we are talking about the invasion by the largest country of the world into the largest country of Europe. And this cannot break into the American news cycle more than just in the past week when the President and Chancellor Merkel was speaking. More coverage was devoted to the health condition of a former celebrity's daughter in the United States than that news conference. So it's a very, for the fact that the largest country in the world is invading the largest nation in Europe in an open land war, and that's not getting primary media coverage, that's a problem. But that's a problem that's what we touched upon the first part with being other and not being recognized as people that really need to be validated. But it is something that needs more work, and I hope with the media projects that are in pipeline we can get some traction on that. But going back to Vlad's point, we're talking about a criminal enterprise here.
Yes.
We're talking about people who have thrown away not only the 5 bilateral agreements between Ukraine and Russia, but they've thrown away, Putin has broken the UN Charter. It's one of the foundational things that puts the system in place. And yet the rest of the world keeps following the rules and trying to defeat this man. We're talking about the largest nation of the world, and yet he is choosing the points of conflict. He is choosing that we will fight now in Donbass and we will fight here, but in terms of the 6 other active conflict zones that Russia is involved in, they're involved not only in the Donbass, they're involved in Crimea, they're involved in Transnistria, they're involved with troops in Azerbaijan in the dispute there. They're involved in 2 provinces of Georgia as well as the Kuril Islands with Japan. And yet the Donbass is the area that he gets to dictate, even though he has the most territory to defend.
But I also on the Turkish question. This is very important because it actually is Turkish TV, and we're discussing this issue, and it has to be underlined. Turkey has to understand that in the same way as Poland finds an existential threat with those Iskanders that are with nuclear tips that are sitting in Kaliningrad. Let us not kid ourselves. The Crimean Tatars should know this, the Ukrainians should know this, but everyone in the Black Sea area, and Apakan was at one of our conferences, the ones that I've been talking about. And it's interesting that Ambassador Apakan understood it then, Black Sea security. You can imagine how the dynamic of the Black Sea changes if you put nuclear-tipped Iskanders in Crimea. You have Bulgaria, Romania, Turkey as NATO members. You had 2 that were almost treated as NATO members, Georgia and Ukraine, and Moldova wasn't that far behind. You have 6 countries that would be under threat, but with Iskanders, those Iskanders could be threat to the Mediterranean fleet, the NATO Mediterranean fleet. With nuclear tips. So what we're talking about is how does Montrose, how is it that the Crimean War, which said to the Russians, you no longer can have this as a Russian lake. For 150 years, it was open to international trade. If Montrose and made certain that Turkey controlled the Dardanelles, how does all of that suddenly, can all of that change like this? And why, if they can't look at Budapest and can't look at Budapest as a real protocol or as a real memorandum, who's to say that the Treaty of Montrose then is any more valid?
Exactly.
And this is, Turkey has to truly understand that. Yes, sorry. It was seeing a Turkish representative, I understand, man, that issue has to be raised.
But you're bringing up the point where the UN Charter is being broken, and yet Montrose is something that is entrenched in stone. Why aren't we talking about the Dardanelles? Why aren't we talking about putting pressure on Putin in a way that the rest of the world has accepted for centuries, and yet he cannot follow any of the rules that we've put down?
Yes.
That's a good question that we can, bring up to the Turkish government and discuss. I believe they may already speak, but as I said, there's a big expectation from the European side. I mean, when you look at the old benefits going on in the region, Turkey is also waiting European to act more. Yeah. Collaboration as well. I mean, you can't just, okay, let's do it, but, there should be a coalition on that factor too. So.
And that is, there was a moment during President George W. Bush's term when he posed a question, and it was very ad hoc, but I seem to be clinging on it because it has affected me. And if you take a look at the map of Russia, and I thought it was a very, very poignant observation on his part. And when you look at the map of Russia, you look at the Russian geographical locations. President Bush, sort of not asked, but commented to Vladimir Putin then, he said, are you with the East or are you with the West? Now, you have the Siberian Federation all the way onto your east. You have Tatarstan as well in Central Asia. And now, what with this battlefield in Ukraine, what is, Vlad, the vision for Russia? Is it with the West values?
Well,
is it with the East values? Or it is with the colonizer values? What is the frame of rule here for Russia?
If we are speaking about Putin, I think...
yes, Putin's Russia.
Yeah, Putin's Russia, and Putin, I think he does not care. Actually, he does not care about Russia. He does not care about Russian people. All he cares is his power. His all efforts it's all about securing his own power. If it's if it helps him to secure his power, if it helps him to stay with the West, he will stay with the West. If that helps him to stay with the East, with China, to secure his power, he will do that. It's all about securing Putin's power. It's all about power. That's it.
That's an answer. That seems to be the conclusions that we are arriving. So I want to now, within the last 30 minutes of our session, if I can just go around the table and if you can present how can we regain Crimea? Walter, I will start with you. Do we reimagine ourselves as a, do we reinvent ourselves? By that I mean Ukrainian and Crimean Tatars alike. How can we regain Crimea diplomatically, politically?
Well, it's clear that a lot of people will tell you that the military option may be off the table, but I think, man, in the broader sense, is someone on? Or
no, it's just,
it's just on?
The feedback that was feedback.
Okay. But in the broader sense, what I see is that I think Putin has a problem. I think he has been ad hocing it. I think he did ad hoc it in Crimea. I think Arsene made a very good point. I think Sam actually said it even earlier at the beginning of our process. And I think that in some ways, Donbass, I'm listening to some of the policymakers in Washington, even the military ones, they all understand that even this debate between Debaltsevo and whether it's going to be Mariupol or Debaltsevo, that is going to be the decisive sort of battle for Donbass. I think that a lot of people would argue that it probably is Mariupol because our friend Putin needs a bridge to Crimea. He knows, as we know, that there is no land communication with Crimea. And trying to feed and trying to keep Crimea by sea, and by sea or air alone, especially when the rest of the world has not recognized. And so tourism is not going to be a big thing, and agriculture is not going to be a big thing, because you never know where the water and the electricity come from next, and that's coming out of Ukraine. And if you're in a state of war with Ukraine, that could be a problem. He can't hold on to Crimea if he can't do things, if he can't build that land bridge. And I think then one of the things that we have to insist on is that as we stress the human rights violations in Crimea, as we have the world attend to Crimea and see that this is a potential for someday for becoming a Bosnia or Kosovo, at that same point in the information warfare, at the same time, we really do all have to put in the pledge and say the Ukrainians have to stop the Russians in Donbass. If they go beyond Donbass, as some of this terrible thing that's going on, we will have a problem. That's the first side. The second side is we really do, and Yaroslav, I'm proud of you, I'm proud that you're here with us. We really do also have to start talking more. And this BBC and CNN, it's not just about Crimean Tatars. And what Arsene was talking about, or we were talking about getting more information out about Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians to CNN and BBC International. We have to really get BBC and CNN International and Euronews to start covering the Russian Democrats. Yaroslav, you really ought to be on every single channel talking about how there should be, eventually, a change in that regime, because this cannot go on. Putin can't be destroying the economy, having mothers, lose their sons on a rate that approaches Chechnya and Afghanistan. It's just ridiculous. So all of this, we can get Crimea back. We can. Because he can't really get to Crimea by land if he can be stopped in Donbass. And at that point, we may be able to convince him to let go of it. Otherwise, we are all going to have a problem. Okay, sorry.
Ali, the media pundits that are out there, rightfully so, CNN and MSNBC as well, there seems to be an attitude of fait accompli.
Yes.
And also, if you recollect, in the beginning period of occupation of Crimea, former President Carter mentioned that Crimea was always part of Russia, and that it wasn't something, it wasn't fire in his belly, in other words, okay? So, I know that Turkish people do not feel that way. And from a Turkish perspective, how can we regain Crimea?
I think, first of all, generating awareness is very important. Maybe Ukrainian, Turkish, and other organizations come up together and hire some PR companies in the US. Pick the right ones and work with the PR companies. And to be honest with you, past President Carter or others, most of them, they don't even know where the Crimea is. If you ask our American fellows, maybe 60–70%, they don't know where Crimea is, right? So we need to educate them first. Where the Crimea is, what's the issue? I mean, that's, I think, biggest problem to create the awareness in the United States and other countries. So working with the PR companies, as well as, as an example, Turkish American organizations, we create action alerts like Pax Turkica is one of them.
Yes.
Like Russia's recent illegal annexation of Crimea. We did some PR companies and distribute to the members of Congress and Senate. So I think we need to come up with more action alerts or action campaigns nationwide.
Rather than piggybacking the Crimean Tatar issue on others, I think more effectively if there's a collaboration or partnership would be more clear because the issues are so complex. What would your suggestions?
So my suggestion is, I said, number one is the hiring PR companies, you know, all Ukrainian, Turkish and other organizations come up together and working on the action plans and talking with all elected officials. And we need to maybe more pressure on the United Nations and European Union. I mean, when you look at the Security Council, there are 5 members. If one rejects, you can't, you know, pass a resolution on the Security Council, and you see other countries like, I don't want to give names, but when they blocked, you can get a resolution. So I mean, we need to question more on the international organizations, how they are effective on these issues. And our feeling is, and my feeling is, to be honest with you, Crimea started to be forgotten. When we look at the Minsk agreement, it wasn't on the negotiation. I mean, there was a question to the State Department. There was a question that why Crimea wasn't on the agenda. It was the ceasefires and the east part Ukraine. So it seems like Crimea is getting like behind of these crises. So as I said, generating awareness is the number one right now for us.
Yes, Habib Alto, how can we regain Crimea?
But you know what I feel, I look at the map, and also since I am in both part and for Crimean Tatar, and also I have been living in Turkey because my husband is in Turkish, so that's where I have now my life in 30-somewhat years. What I learned from my family and what I'm living with my husband's family is the same. So I never felt Crimea was separate from us. We have same culture. We cry for the same song. We laugh for the same jokes. And our inheritance, our roots are the same. Anatolian, which start with Aile. And there is one branch is also in Crimea. Muhteşem de Süleyman. The mother was from Crimea. So there are so many bonds and togetherness.
Yes.
And now we are talking about the Crimea is part of Russia.
Yeah.
How that can be? And our government, yes, supports our, you know, Crimean dances, the music, but it is there anyway. I mean, the government doesn't have to do anything because it is our own culture, it is our own music, it's our own food, you know. But the governments should deal with the government agreement.
Yes.
You see, that's where they should be active. That's where the leaders functions.
Yes.
Okay? You know, as a common, you know, people, that we are carrying our own culture, but everyone has a purpose and goal in the society, and leaders also. If leaders is not protecting its own people's right and being, and then that nation is doomed to die. And we have seen numerous leaders throughout Africa. How
And
they
failed
can,
states, North Korea, absolutely
how they
a failed
can
state.
easily sacrifice their own people.
Yes.
Okay? So they don't have to look for an enemy from outside.
Yes.
They do the worst harm to their own people.
Yes.
So in short, what I, would like to, make the message that our leaders are becoming very important. And also our NGO, the society should also guide our leaders. Time to time, you know, they forget the weight of the society, and most of the time our leaders sometimes stays in 20th century and try to lead 21st century with their 20th century's know-how.
Yes.
And that's where a lot of mistakes.
And some
is being
19th
done.
century at
Oh
that.
yeah,
so,
I mean, you know,
right.
the Middle Age, we can go there too.
Right,
So
yes.
how you can have Crimea without Crimean inside?
Crimean
Tatars
Tatars
inside. How
Yeah.
you can be Turkey without Turkish inside?
Yes.
And same, you can go on.
Right.
So
How
yes,
can you have Ukraine without
Ukrainian
Ukrainians?
inside. So Crimea is for Crimean Tatars.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
the given factor.
Vlad, on that issue, how do we regain Crimea?
Well, first of all, I would completely agree with my colleagues at this table. The main obstacle, we all understand that the main obstacle is the Putin's regime. As soon as Putin is gone, we can start just the process of returning Crimea to Ukraine, back to Ukraine. And so first of all, we must stay united. We must unite our efforts. I mean, the Russian democratic opposition, the Ukrainian people, the Crimean Tatar people, we must stay united and unite our efforts in terms of our fight against Putin's regime and raising awareness on an international level, the United States as well. And also it's a matter of, I mean, it's the fight for the minds of the Russian people. It's the information war. And as soon as we start winning this war, as soon as we will make the Russian people go out on the streets in large numbers, in great numbers, like hundreds of thousands, that might be the path, and that might be the way to dismantle the Putin's regime in Russia.
Andrej, how is your thinking on how we can regain Crimea?
Well, there's a realpolitik message coming out right now that Ukraine will be turned into a West Germany. Ukraine will be funded. Ukraine will be propped up so that its own civil society can develop in a way much more fast than what's happening in Russia. And then when the time comes that Putin will fall apart, because the demographics are against him. The Soviet demographic specifically. So that's the Soviet demographic in Crimea, which is dying off week after week, month after month, year after year. And in Russia itself, the demographics are horrible. The fact that they're projected to lose a third of their population within the next 3 decades is a catastrophe for them. So it is about preparing ourselves, as Vlad said, for the coming change. We want to make sure that Ukraine is ready to accept the brunt of having a thoroughly dominated society like Crimea is going to be over the next several years. They will be again repressed. They will not have access to the outside world as the rest of Europe has, as the rest of Ukraine is going to have. But we need to start putting in place the mechanisms now for integrating them when they come back. So that means documenting the crimes, as well as putting in the economic system to prop it up later.
These group of panelists that we are here today are really representative and actual and not imaginary, representative of thoughts and actions and experiences that represent positive dynamics and actions in regaining Crimea. I thank everyone to our viral audience, and definitely it was wonderful to be with the world tonight. Thank you everyone, thank you panelists, and thank you Ukraine Congressional Committee here in New York as well. Thank you.